So we already know that the MacBook Air has been announced, and I'm sure many of you were getting those wallets ready for whenever sometime next month finally hits. However, I think many of you, especially for our international neighbors, that you might be thankful that you either made or will continue to make an investment for at least the remainder of this year into the M1 MacBook Air. And if you're thinking that you're going to miss that iconic MacBook Air wedge, then of course this is a bit of nostalgia for you to hold on to for at least a little bit longer, because Apple is going to stick with this line for $999 US, while the M2 version is $1199, which some of you have shared that outside of the US, that this is starting at several hundred more, between $1499 and even $1599. Of course, that really does depend on the geolocation of where you are. And I understand that the pricing difference from $999 to $1199, it's not necessarily from a machining standpoint, as I feel that since this is just a slimmer version of the MacBook Pros, and what I'm not trying to do here is dilute the importance of these variations in the machining process, but what we're really looking at here is the liquid retina display, the MagSafe, the colors, and of course the ability to add more GPU cores and RAM than that of the M1. And this, my friends, is what is really important to understand, that from a day-to-day performance of what many will likely just use their devices for, it's a psychological game. Because if you had just dropped $999 or somewhere in that ballpark, then of course the M2 came out. It's not out, it's been announced at that exact same price, then I feel that this would have been an even more punch in the gut to the consumer. And you might be able to argue that, yeah, that extra $200 US makes perfect sense with those upgrades. But aside from the design and the MagSafe, you've still got two Thunderbolt 3 ports, although at least now with MagSafe, you've got two ports that you can at least dedicate to those other peripherals while still charging. And of course, that display is going to be gorgeous, but so is the current M1 display. And of course, some may see this as like innovative, while others, I hope, really understand that this is just iterative. So the extra $200 US really creates that psychological buffer. The M1 comes in as the entry-level portable, but then you flip back to the consumer behavior on that extra $200 US, you still have that new portable option that folks will likely gravitate toward, because that's butting up against the 13-inch MacBook Pro, which that's a little confusing, which honestly, the only reason you might want that is for a little bit of that extra thermal headroom, because it will have that fan. And I would have said prior to these silicon chips that this would be the better buy, because those Intel chips were like space heaters in these devices. And the MacBook Air was never going to be an option when I was purchasing these laptops for my own business. It was just always the base model, or at least somewhere in the mid-tier MacBook Pro. But now I really don't think that this is much of an issue anymore. So of course, you'd probably end up with the M2 13-inch MacBook Pro anyway, because that's the one that's going to be available while you wait like for months on the M2 Air, or possibly still waiting on your M1 Pro and M1 Max machine, as a lot of you still are. But the fact that it's sitting in the middle as far as price bracketing is concerned, still, I mean, from a consumer behavior standpoint, it's a good play here. But from what we know, there's going to be better single-threaded performance, and they'll have slightly better overall performance than the M1. And it appears that if you're leaning more toward creative work with video, especially with that media engine here with ProRes, H.264 and 265, doesn't mean that the M1 can't handle the video codecs. You've seen that on this channel. I have reviewed that and tested it over and over, but that may be a draw for you. But this is where testing really does need to occur. And I know many of you may be interested in the M1 Pro and M1 Max comparisons. You know they're going to be flying out, but I really think it's going to be a moot point. However, you are still only going to be pushing one external display at 60 Hertz from what at least I can see. And so honestly, I believe that your overall experience may likely just not really change all that much from the M1. I mean, generally speaking. But again, we do need to test and also not really get too wrapped up in the synthetics, but we need to see what this is going to do for the consumer. However, to note, which I'm pretty sure that you've experimented with this yourself, that once you start to spec out these M2 Airs, even adding in the extra RAM option, a little extra storage, then you're starting to just tease that 14-inch MacBook Pro territory. And you can argue about future-proofing until you're red in the face, because that you need this ultra portable to be completely maxed out so that it can carry you through the next 5 to 6 years, really on a hypothetical. And I understand that that extra spend may be worth it to you, and that is your buying decision. I just wish that we weren't in this era of disposable hardware, but we really are here, and it seems to be that we're pretty much well entrenched in it. at least when it comes to this particular ecosystem. But quickly touching on that ecosystem, this is what I said in my last video, and I stand behind the fact that the hardware doesn't really matter unless the software and the developer community really isn't able to make it better, at least better use of what's under the hood. Because with macOS Ventura, Stage Manager definitely seemed to be the updated center stage or the feature as far as at the event, because this also did spill into iPad OS 16. But FaceTime switching between devices, using your iPhone as a camera, a webcam, which likely reaffirms that the 1080p camera is still not what it really could be, but gaming. And I know that I've crossed a line here, and I'm certainly not going to gloat, but here we go. And I've previously mentioned Vulkan as an acquisition play here, but Apple really staying firmly planted with their own Metal 3, and of course the Metal FX with the upscaling and render times and resource loading APIs when you're actually trying to load the title. I mean, I guess it'll just be game on. And don't even laugh at that. That is terrible. But as far as the software experience, like how you might feel right now, and when all these updates come in, as if maybe starting to feel like you've gotten a renewed M1 machine. So that's where I can see the current Air edging out as far as the win is concerned on price and really availability in the shorter term. And of course, when we test, we'll of course know more. And of course, this may feel more like a dad conversation than talking about tech, so boring, whatever, but my ego is just fine, and I'm fine to be wrong on this one. So I guess we'll just see. Anyway, you beautiful humans, I really would love to hear your thoughts on this one. Who among you, I want to know this, who among you waiting on your current devices to ship have already canceled those, or you are thinking about that pivot over to these updated devices? I really would love to know. Hit me in the comments below. I really appreciate your time here. You go out there and rock those faces, and I'll see you right back here on the next one.